Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. The tribal advocacy group Tewa Women United is warning residents near the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico about risks from the release of gas containing the radioactive substance tritium. Lab officials say the threat to the public is minimal, but opponents say they don't know all the risks. It's one of a number of radioactive waste issues near Native communities. We'll hear more coming up after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bull, sitting in for Antonia Gonzalez. Bureau of Indian Affairs offices in Wisconsin and Minnesota remain open after the Department of Government Efficiency targeted them for termination. As Danielle Kading reports, the initiative, formerly led by billionaire Elon Musk, had proposed canceling leases for several offices earlier this year.
The cancellations affected offices in Ashland and Shawano in Wisconsin and Bemidji in Minnesota. Wisconsin tribes say the Bureau of Indian Affairs office in Ashland is a critical regional hub that processes land trust applications and provides education assistance and law enforcement support. Robert Blanchard is chair of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. He says closing the office would have been a hardship for the tribe.
We would have probably had to go to maybe Minneapolis or some other place further away from us to get services.
Bill Broidrick represents the owner of the Ashland office. He says Wisconsin tribes adopted a resolution in opposition to its closure.
On that basis, the decision was made by the Bureau of Indian Affairs to keep the office open.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs says all three offices remain open. The agency says it's working to ensure adequate space continues to be available to support delivery of services to tribes. For National Native News, I'm Danielle Kading.
While summer is winding down, powwow season is now a year-long observation thanks to venues held indoors or in warmer climes like the Southwest. But you can still get a chilly reception if you don't mind your manners. Buffalo's Fire recently talked to several natives at the 55th United Tribes Technical College powwow and asked them what their number one rule for good etiquette was.
One of the main things I'd say not to do at a powwow is put your chairs down where the drums are supposed to be. Gotta think about all the singers, and the singers have wives and they got kids and whatnot. A lot of folks try to fight for space and yet they don't even sit there the whole weekend.
My rule is to pick up after yourself wherever you're sitting. Make sure the trash gets in the garbage can.
People should know is not to take pictures of you without your permission. Always ask where you're from, your name, what tribe you're from, where you're from. If it's okay if take pictures of them.
Don't block the elders. Let them through if they're getting to their chairs. Don't stand in front of them when they're trying to watch the powwow.
No picture taking unless you're buying, because they usually send it back overseas and they copy our work and then they send it back over here. They sell it for cheap. Like they say it's native made, but they're not native made.
My rule is to be good and help look out for the vendors. A lot of the times that they sit here and they have to spend a lot of their day, they don't get the chance to get up, to go get drinks, to go get food. So outside of just being kind and smiling and, see if you have the opportunity to offer a hand and help them out, do so. Help them, see if they had water, see if they got something to eat and stuff like that. Just be good to them.
That was Dion Crazy Bull, Gabby Rave, Easton Wolf, Richard Gillette, Leroy Henry, and Gia MacArthur. All natives sharing their powwow's do's and don'ts as part of Buffalo's Fire's coverage of the UTTC International Powwow held earlier this month. And on this day in 1893, following a pistol shot, more than 100,000 settlers raced onto the Cherokee Strip of Oklahoma, land once inhabited by Native Americans. It was the largest land run in history for territory once considered too arid for farmers and relegated to displaced Native people. But settlers pressured President Benjamin Harrison to open up the area to non-natives, who hurried to stake their claim. September 16th is also Trail of Tears Commemoration Day for the thousands of Cherokees forced to leave their homes during President Andrew Jackson's term. This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bull.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by Drummond Woodsum, a full-service law firm whose nationally recognized tribal nations practice provides services to tribal nations and their enterprises and to companies that do business with tribes across the country. More at dwmlaw.com. Support for journalism that raises the awareness of child well-being to citizens and to policymakers provided by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, building a brighter future for children, families, and communities. Information at aecf.org.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. The Native advocacy group Tewa Women United is warning Pueblo citizens and other local residents about potential radioactive exposure from a project at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. The facility is releasing radioactive tritium gas from storage containers over a 2-week period. The laboratory, along with state and federal regulators, insist the risk from the plan is minimal. Tewa Women United and other opponents say officials don't know enough to fully assess the risk, especially to children and pregnant women. We'll hear about that project today. And a little later, we will hear about plans by the online retailer Amazon and other tech companies to build nuclear power stations near tribal land in Washington and Oregon to provide electricity to data centers. Join us with your questions and comments by calling 1-800-996-2848. Are there nuclear power plants or projects happening near your community? How about radioactive waste cleanup projects? We're at 1-800-99-NATIVE. Give us a call. Let's now meet today's guests. Joining us from Santa Clara Pueblo in New Mexico is Marissa Naranjo. She is the Deputy Director of Sovereign Energy and a board member for Honor Our Pueblo Existence, or HOPE. She is Santa Clara Pueblo. Marissa, hello, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me back.
Joining us from Los Alamos, New Mexico is Pat Moss. He is the Deputy Manager of the National Nuclear Security Administration's Los Alamos Field Office. Pat, hello, and welcome to the show to you as well.
Hello, and thanks for having me on today.
And joining us from Bethesda, Maryland, is Dr. Arjun Makijani. He holds a PhD in nuclear fusion from the University of California at Berkeley and is the president of the Institute of Energy and Environmental Research. Dr. Makijani, hello, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Thanks so much, Sean, for having me.
It's a pleasure. And Marissa, I'm going to go ahead and begin with you today. Tell us, what is your main concern about this project? Gas is being released into the atmosphere near your homelands, Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico.
Thanks for the question, Sean, and good morning, everyone. So considering that Lano was scheduled to begin venting today, I just wanted to start by sharing that, like so many of our community members, I prayed this morning for our air, our water, our soil, plants, animals, and for the generations of our families who have carried illness and trauma since the Manhattan Project. I think the widespread concern among Pueblo and local communities that we're seeing right now is grounded in the fact that for 80 years, our communities have lived with sacrifice, contamination, and disregard for the impacts we've experienced. And in this case, even our own New Mexico Environment Department has said the urgency to vent tritium comes from nearly 20 years of Lano failing to properly manage that hazardous waste. So the history of harm, numerous accidents, and this record of negligence is why I think communities have real concern about safety. And to that point, I just want to thank our Pueblos, our tribal organizations, and community members for doing all they can collectively at the government to government level and through community-based action. You know, this, I think, really is less about opposition and more about acting on the love, responsibility, and the independent scientific evidence brought forward through community advocacy that we now have in protection of our culture, our sacred clouds and rain, our most vulnerable, including our elders, our pregnant people, infants, and our future generations.
Marissa, What can you tell our listeners about tritium? What are the risks as you understand them?
If it's okay, Sean, I'd love to defer that question to our expert scientist, Dr. Makajani.
Okay, Dr. Makajani, please join the conversation.
Well, tritium is radioactive hydrogen. And as you know, water is H2O, hydrogen oxide. And when one of those, and it's non-radioactive, of course, it's the stuff of life, which is the central indigenous wisdom that we are all learning. And when one of those hydrogens get replaced by tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen, water becomes radioactive. Now, tritium is extremely radioactive. The amount of tritium that could be vented at the maximum 30,000 curies, 3 grams, a tenth of an ounce, could contaminate more than 300 billion gallons of water to the drinking water limit. So that's a very small amount of tritium in terms of mass, but it's extremely radioactive. So, it's tens of thousands of times more radioactive than plutonium. And it's water, crosses the placenta, it gets into every cell. We're 60% water as adults, and fetuses are 80% water. So it gets everywhere in the body. And so there are regulations to prevent, large doses from tritium. Every bit of radioactivity will create risk. And the regulations in question, there are 2 of them. One is under the Clean Air Act, which limits doses to people so that they're not exposed to more than what the establishment considers acceptable, even though every bit of exposure creates a risk. And there is a Department of Energy rule that says even if you are meeting the regulatory limit of the Environmental Protection Agency, you should try to minimize exposures and protect the environment beyond that as much as possible. And in my opinion, Los Alamos is likely violating both.
Okay. Dr. Makajani, so what we're talking about today are these canisters of tritium gas being released over a 2-week period. Are there any similar releases anywhere else in the country or throughout history that we can compare this to?
Yeah, so currently, there's actually a big tritium release going on from Fukushima, where the huge nuclear accident took place in 2011. They have about 1 million tons of radioactive water stored over there, and they are gradually releasing it to the ocean. The total amount of tritium and that's the main pollutant there, tritium that they are releasing. The total amount of tritium that they would release over 30 years is 3 grams. And that is the amount of tritium that Los Alamos at the maximum, at the upper limit, would release in 1 day. So you're not talking a small, and countries, Korea, China, the Marshall Islands, Pacific Island countries have been very concerned about this 3 grams of release over 30 years. I spent quite a bit of time advising the Pacific Islands Forum on this and advising on alternatives, how the dumping could be avoided. Of course, the nuclear establishment there also ignored us. In this case, the nuclear establishment has also ignored us, even though we did expert studies that they have not disputed our conclusions. And our expert studies, the modeling that we did and the analysis that I did based on that modeling indicated that using the same kind of weather data from the same weather station that Los Alamos has said, 1 canister, 30,000 curies in a day, that the Clean Air Act would be violated.
Thank you.
Sure, one very important thing I might say is they calculate doses for adults, and the doses to infants would be 3 times higher. It took Los Alamos a long time, but on the 20th of August, their health physicist, Dave Feeney, acknowledged that doses to infants would be 3 times higher. So even if you accept Los Alamos calculations, doses to children would be higher, infants would be higher than the Clean Air Act limit. So basically, Los Alamos and EPA are saying, we're going to ignore children as a matter of compliance with the Clean Air Act. And I would really like the NNSA to address this explicitly and clearly. Why are you not considering doses to infants in your compliance calculation?
Okay. Doctor, I want to ask you, though, there has been a case made to state regulators, and they decided that the risk to humans is minimal. What are they not considering?
Well, they are considering that they're going to capture most of the tritium. And they may well do that, although they haven't said how much tritium they're going to capture, what fraction they will actually capture. So my main concern is, are they obeying the law? Are they proper? The law is what is supposed to minimize the risks to the public. And there are two laws in question, and both of them, in my opinion, are likely being violated. And so, and infants are not being regarded as members of the public. They haven't even agreed to measure the risk. So there's this hydrogen gas, supposedly an explosion risk. They have modeled that these cylinders could explode if they are transported without venting. And I have said to them repeatedly, and in writing, and verbally, and in meetings, why don't you just measure the headspace? EPA has also asked them the same, Region 6, under the previous administration. And they've said, well, we need the same equipment to vent as to measure, so why not just vent? And my argument is, why not measure? If there's no explosion risk, you would transport this without venting, and then you can recover the tritium. The tritium that we're talking about is worth somewhere between $250,000 and $1 million. Tritium is hundreds of times more expensive than gold, and because it's used in nuclear weapons and hard to make. But they have refused to do that, even though they are going to sample this headspace. They could just sample and decide and make the results public, but they have refused to do that repeatedly.
Okay. Dr. Makajani, we have to take a break. We're going to come back, continue our conversation. We're going to hear more from Marissa Naranjo. And we also have Pat Moss, who is on the show today, Deputy Manager of the National Nuclear Security Administration's Los Alamos Field Office. Anyone living in northern New Mexico, you might have a thought, you might have insights, you might have a perspective to share on this issue we're talking about today, the release of radioactive tritium gas from storage containers at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Give us a call, 1-800-996-2848. A high-profile and public murder of a controversial figure is an online topic of conversation for everyone from auto mechanics to presidents. But posts about Charlie Kirk's death have cost dozens of people their jobs and prompted complaints about the lack of civil discourse. We'll explore the limits of social media posts on the next Native America Calling.
Support provided by Amerind. Amerind is 100% tribally owned and partners with tribes and their businesses to provide affordable commercial insurance coverage, protect tribal sovereignty, and strengthen Native American communities by helping to keep dollars in Indian country. Information about property, liability, commercial auto, and workers' comp available at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
You are listening to Native America Calling. A nuclear research lab in northern New Mexico is depressurizing 4 containers that will release small amounts of the radioactive gas tritium into the air. For years, Pueblo and other tribes and local environmental organizations have opposed the plan. We're hearing from them and a spokesperson from the National Nuclear Security Administration today. You can join us by calling 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. One of our guests today, Marissa Naranjo, is the Deputy Director of Sovereign Energy. She is joining us from her homelands at Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico. And Marissa, listening to you and Dr. Makajani explain the risks, explain some of these details with regard to tritium gas, I want to ask you, Santa Clara Pueblo and other neighboring pueblos there in northern New Mexico. What are they saying, and in what way are they speaking out? What kind of consultations occurring?
Thanks for the question, Sean. I want to start by just saying, in response to the question, that from a federal Indian policy standpoint, the history between our tribes and Llano is incredibly complex. But to oversimplify, like with many systems of colonization that came to stay, our pueblos found ways to adapt, to integrate, and when the costs were too high, to resist in protection of community well-being. And I think that same dynamic continues today with the tritium venting issue. In this political climate, we know pueblos and tribes across Indian country are already overwhelmed by constant crises, from unpredictable federal budget cuts to our environmental departments and tribal historic preservation offices, to shifting policies for environmental and sacred site protection. Tribal sovereignty is really under threat on many fronts. And yet, even under these pressures, our pueblos continue to dedicate significant capacity and limited resources to engage in federal consultation processes on Llano issues like this one. And this is why our tribal organizations and community advocates, have always urged NMED, DOE, NNSA, and Llano to respect tribal sovereignty, really to ensure that meaningful tribal consultation and consent. And, like some tribes and community orgs have said, our Pueblo and local communities really should not continue to be sacrificed in the name of national security and the nuclear weapons complex. And then on the public engagement side, I think that, Llano will say that the public has been included, but our communities are very familiar with the difference between checking boxes and meaningful inclusion. Tewa Women United and Communities for Clean Water, have documented years of Llano's procedural failures and patterns of exclusion for public engagement. I also want to point out and kind of review a little bit more of what Dr. Makajani was talking about, that at the root of this issue is a deeper kind of exclusion, and that has to do with how safety itself is defined. So Llano's compliance with what's considered a safe level of radioactive exposure by EPA is based on models of a hypothetical 30-year-old, 150-pound white male with a Western diet. Now, tribes and tribal organizations have been pointing out for years that this doesn't take into account our Pueblo lifeways, farming, hunting, gathering, pottery making, or simply being on the land. These daily realities for our communities, which are our real exposure pathways, are excluded. And as Dr. Makajani was mentioning, those expert reports have found that infants and pregnant people are even more vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I can go into detail about some of the procedural and process failures.
Well, let's hold that thought there, Marissa, because I want to bring Pat Moss into our conversation now. He is, again, the Deputy Manager for the National Nuclear Security Administration's Los Alamos Field Office. And Pat, thank you again for joining the show. And this topic that we're discussing today, the release of radioactive gas into the air, to anyone listening, it's going to sound very serious, perhaps even frightening to some people. Can you start us off for just how can this be safe? That's my first question.
So that is based on a couple of things. So as Dr. Makajani mentioned, tritium is a radioisotope or a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. From a physics perspective, it has, instead of just a single proton, a proton and two neutrons, which makes it radiologically unstable, so it does decay over time. So tritium bioaccumulates in the form of water, so its uptake into people is in water. Now, our capture system, first off, is designed to capture predominantly tritiated water or water vapor that contains tritium. So our capture fraction will be incredibly high from that perspective. So the amount of material we expect to release is dominantly non-radioactive hydrogen, probably some amount of tritium left in that gas. It's impossible for us to tell until we actually open the container and test that headspace what that fraction looks like and exactly what we're dealing with. So that's why we have a very deliberate process to walk through the procedure with testing and verification at every step of the way. As far as safety, we'll go back to the EPA limits on release of this material. The EPA limit is a 8 millirem dose to a member of the public, which we've done those calculations. We expect to be far below that. In working with the state, we agreed to a lower threshold in this case of 6 millirem because we felt that was something we could definitely stand behind. Again, we hope the numbers are much below that, and we will be doing those calculations with actual environmental conditions and actual thresholds of what we encounter. But we know we'll be significantly below the 8 millirem. We know compliance-wise we will maintain for sure below the 6 millirem. And the regulatory limit is based on the protection of the public. So we work to our regulations. That's our marching orders from the government, from the Environmental Protection Agency, whose charter is to protect the public, and we comply with those requirements.
Okay,
so
Pat.
And on a personal note, I live in the community of White Rock, which is adjacent to this operation. It's the closest community, and I feel that my friends, family are going to be completely protected in that community.
Okay. Pat, the challenge with a show like the topic we're discussing today is this is really technical. And I can tell you right off the bat, a lot of these numbers and these measurements and just this whole idea of releasing this tritium gas in these containers, it just seems very complicated, complex. And I think a lot of listeners might be thinking the same thing. But so I want to just take a step back and let's acknowledge that the federal government does have a history of exposing unwitting New Mexico residents to varying degrees of radiation. And it goes back to the very first atomic bomb test. So my question to you is, and I think a lot of listeners are going to be thinking the same thing, why should people trust what officials are saying now, today?
So our outreach to the public has significantly changed. We're much more transparent than we were back in the early days of the Manhattan Project and even the days of the Cold War, where secrecy of our operations in total, in many ways, outdrove our ability to or willingness to be transparent. And the department has changed that. A lot of that happened in the 80s with the advent of the Nuclear Facility Safety Board and some of their regulatory work. And I will point out that the Defense Board was one of the organizations that reviewed this operation. In their public meeting back in July, and I forget the exact date, their slides indicated and their presentation indicated that they felt that our operation was fully protective of the public. So there you have an independent government agency whose sole marching orders from Congress and the executive branch are to keep tabs of the NNSA. And our communications are consistent. So hopefully that provides an additional level of confidence that we're being forthright about this operation.
Okay. Now, the ventilation project was supposed to start over the weekend. That was the original schedule. Was it postponed?
So it was postponed on Saturday due to weather. We began equipment setup on Sunday. I was on site to observe that operation personally. Yesterday, we continued setup of the equipment and surveys within the, I'll use the term transportainer that these vessels are in. We found no evidence of tritium or any other radioactive isotopes during those surveys, and today we're continuing on with the procedure to move towards depressurization.
I asked Marissa earlier, Pat, about consultation. I want to ask you the same thing. Can you tell us any of the consultation that occurred between NNSA and LANL and the Native American communities there in northern New Mexico?
Certainly. We've consulted with a number of the tribes and pueblos in the area, both in a joint forum that I led down at, I think that was at Buffalo Thunder is where we had that one. Sorry, I've done a number of these meetings. We also met individually with San Felipe Pueblo, with San Ildefonso Pueblo. I believe Zia Pueblo has asked for a consultation after the operation is conducted. So we had an open invitation for anyone who wished to engage. So in general, over the last 5 years, we have reached out to both the tribal community as well as the public consistently for the past 5 years.
And what have been the concerns that you've heard from the tribes there at these consultation meetings?
So it's a lot of the same concerns that have been voiced today, that we're going to release a significant amount of radiological material, cause damage to the public and the environment. And we've tried to bring the scientific expertise from the laboratory to the table to reassure folks that not only are we compliant with the regulatory requirements, but we are confident in our own calculations that we won't impact any member of the public.
Pat, is there any alternative to releasing this tritium gas into the air? Any other types of technologies or methodologies that maybe would lower the risk that we're talking about today?
Certainly. We use a tritium containment system, capture system called an ALM-1 in our operations at our tritium facility to contain tritium in that vapor form. That is integrated into the system that is deployed currently. We have a cross-check to verify we can't have breakthrough on that capture system, and that is probably the highest efficiency system we can put in place to ensure we minimize the release of additional material. And that has been incorporated into the process since day one.
Pat, one of the things we've really learned from these nuclear waste and radioactive material issues that we have in New Mexico is it can sometimes take years for the full impacts to be manifested. Will there be any type of continued monitoring or analysis of the surrounding communities for an extended period of time to check for health effects or any of these negative impacts that potentially could occur, like we've already heard from our other guests today?
So we do extensive monitoring and surveying of the local area as well as some of the extended areas all the time for all of our operations. And this would be no different. I will add, though, tritium is naturally occurring. So it is created in the upper atmosphere as well as in the oceans through neutron capture from radiation from space. So it is a natural occurring radioisotope. For perspective, the Pacific Ocean itself naturally contains around 8,000 grams of tritium as a kind of a basis. So the small amount we're actually looking at releasing would likely should be indistinguishable from the natural background in the area. Also, would be hard to distinguish from other sources of release of tritium that we see around us in our local community. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, my dad gave me a compass that glowed in the dark. And later in life, when I was studying physics, I realized, oh, it was a tritium-filled military compass. Several of these things exist. There's tritium-filled gun sights, the compass, watches, runway lights, and exit signs are all powered by tritium to ensure lights exist in kind of a power out situation.
Okay, Pat, before I go back to Marissa, can you remind us now, what is the timeline going forward in terms of the release?
So we are in the operation today. We will continue that operation, monitoring our meteorological condition. We expect to be complete within a 2-week period from the start of operations, which was Sunday. And we will notify the public once we complete the operation. And we will be providing a report via our publicly facing website for this operation. Once we know the actual amounts released, we'll do those calculations, and that will be released as an LAUR, or a laboratory publication on the operation.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Marissa, we've got a couple of minutes before the next break, and I want to ask you about a study Tewa Women United and analyzed tritium potential, its effect on children and pregnant people. Tell us more about that study and why it's so important to our conversation today, or why you feel this risk again could be so considerable.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And again, I'd like to defer to Dr. Makajani as he actually authored one of the studies.
Okay, Dr. Makajani, yeah, we got about a minute and a half before we have to take a next break, so I'm going to give you the first bite of this apple here.
I actually respond to that. We did these calculations for adults and infants, and I'd like to ask Mr. Moss a simple question. He said that their limit is 6 millirem for this release. That is an adult dose, and he should confirm that. At that dose, the dose to infants would be about 18 millirem. That factor of 3 has been acknowledged by the lab health physicist Dave Feeney. I just want to ask him whether that calculation is correct and whether 18 millirem is more than the 10 millirem limit. If he could please answer that for me.
Pat, feel free.
We will be compliant with the regulatorily imposed release threshold. We'll be doing those calculations per the regulation.
All right, we're going to take another break here. We'll come back. We'll continue this conversation. We have the phone lines open. I'm thinking people in northern New Mexico right now, if you're listening on KUNM radio, maybe you're listening online, you're thinking to yourself, geez, this is serious. I need to be involved in these discussions. I need to air my comments, air my insights, my feedback. This is a forum to do that. Give us a call. Let us know what you think. Maybe you live in this area. Maybe you live north of Santa Fe. Maybe you live near Espanola. Maybe you're in Santa Clara Pueblo, Sanai, Okeowenge, Nambe Pueblo, Pewaukee, Zia. Maybe you're a little bit further south, Cochiti, San Domingo, San Felipe. Give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE.
The annual Indian Nations Conservation Alliance National Conference in Las Vegas, October 14th to the 16th, is a movement. Natural resource management, conservation and land stewardship, agricultural technology and innovation. Internationally acclaimed regenerative rancher Alejandro Carrillo will speak on ancestral land practices and sustainable food systems. Info and registration at inca-tcd.org. Inca supports this show.
This is Native America Calling. The online retail giant Amazon is partnering with Energy Northwest on a proposed nuclear energy project in the Pacific Northwest. Tribes in that area where there is a history of nuclear and toxic waste are watching closely. In just a minute, we are going to pivot to this topic, and we have a new guest who represents one of these tribes, and we'll hear from this person. Before I do that, I want to go ahead and wrap up our conversation we're having with regard to the tritium gas release scheduled in Los Alamos. And Marissa Naranjo, I'm going to go ahead and give you the last word. Just wrap this up for our listeners. Anything else they need to understand, be aware of before we pivot to our next topic?
Yes, thank you. I think, like I mentioned in the beginning, this is all just for the love and care of one another in our communities, for our plants and our animals, and especially our sacred rainwater and our clouds. Modeling shows that rainwater could carry contamination from tritium venting. And for our communities, this is not just a technical detail. It really strikes, at the heart of our ways of life. Water's sacred, water's life. We say that all the time. And when tritium becomes part of that water cycle, it doesn't disappear. It can join with the rain, flow into our streams and acequias, settle into the soil, and eventually reach the food we grow and the water we drink. For our Pueblo communities, rain is not only, just a natural resource, it's a living being. It's a gift that sustains our crops, our ceremonies, our survival. And to risk contaminating rainwater is to risk the very source of life that ties us to our homelands and our future generations. So I'll just ask by asking everybody to stay as safe as they can and take care of one another. And please continue to follow our organizations for updates and to support.
All right. Thank you, Marissa. 1-800-996-2848. That is the number. If you would like to join today's conversation, if you have an insight or a question to ask, 1-800-996-2848. Joining us now from Portland, Oregon is Martha Eisenson. She is a tribal attorney for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Martha, good morning and welcome to Native America Calling.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Sean. I really appreciate the invitation.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to join us, Martha, and let's get into it here. The Confederated Tribes is among several tribes and organizations keeping tabs on the development of new nuclear power plants, and the online retailer Amazon is among corporate interests pushing this. Can you tell us, how does Amazon facilitate a nuclear power plant?
So that's a great question. And as you said, and as I want to emphasize, the Confederated Tribes is watching this very closely. Essentially, just to give some background, there's, I'm just going to back up just a minute, unprecedented energy demand in the region, which has been coupled with legislation that has mandated decarbonization goals, and especially in Washington, the Clean Energy Transformation Act commits the state of Washington by law to an electricity supply free of greenhouse gases by 2045. All of that is going on while the demand for energy is increasing greatly. Now, one of the energy sources in Washington is Energy Northwest and the Columbia Generating Station. Amazon, there's an Amazon agreement which was released in October 2024 with Energy Northwest that would fund a multi-year feasibility report before construction of the data centers. Now, the exact location of the Amazon data centers are unknown, but what we do know is that Amazon is partnering with Energy Northwest to purchase energy from the nuclear project that Energy Northwest is working towards bringing forward. That project itself is proposed to be sited at a Hanford site, which is it's on land that they'll be leasing from the Department of, and that they're currently leasing from the Department of Energy. They're looking to extend that lease. So there's several different players here, as you can see. This is all taking place on the 6.4 million acres of ceded land where the tribes have treaty reserved rights pursuant to the Treaty of 1855.
Martha, this power is going to be used for a proposed data center. What can you tell us about this data center?
So we don't know a lot about the data center itself. One thing that is kind of up for speculation and that I feel like it's okay to say is that, one reason Amazon is wanting to site on the Washington side is because there are other data centers in Umatilla County and Morrow County, which is where the reservation sits. There's another Amazon data center coming online in up the road in Arlington, Oregon, eventually, I believe, and it's slated to happen in 5 years. So there's just an enormous call for these data centers, and we don't know. There hasn't been a lot of transparency in regards to the agreement, which is itself between Energy Northwest and Amazon. We know that Amazon wants to. So for a demonstration project, it can be up to 12 small modular nuclear reactors. And what we do know is that Amazon would like to reserve energy from 4 of those reactors. So unfortunately, not a lot of information about the data center itself. The only other thing that I have been told about the data centers is that in regards to cooling, there is a proposed cooling mechanism whereby water that is used to cool will be cooled back down before it is released into the Columbia River, which is very, very important because, as Marissa said, water is life. It's a very important first food for the Columbia tribes.
And the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla, what's their relationship with this land in question?
So the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, this is part of the ceded lands and the usual and the custom areas that were where these treaty reserved rights were reserved, the right to hunt, fish, gather first foods. This is all happening on land that, was at one point previously appropriated by the government for Hanford. The tribe has been here before in a different sense in regards to the federal government kind of requiring, or in this case, private interest really pushing for siting on land that the tribe already has rights to, and that does provide access to first foods, and it's very important. The tribe is always looking forward 7 generations to make sure that this access to and the viability of first foods is preserved.
What type of consultation has occurred among Amazon and these tribes?
So Amazon is a little removed so far from the tribal consultation process. We are so let me reframe this a little bit. So there was an appropriation made through some funds in Washington where $25 million was given, was appropriated for Washington Commerce to facilitate Energy Northwest's non-federal cost share with Amazon to site these plants. So we are actually working currently with Washington Commerce on standing up some real guideposts for exactly what the expectations are for tribal consultation. That has not been completed yet. So tribal consultation, we're almost in this kind of pre-tribal consultation period. And one reason why we're really trying to slow this down is because it is, these very, very serious issues which historically have impacted the tribe greatly. So Amazon has been in contact with the tribe and with Energy Northwest, but in regards to appropriate consultation, that is just getting going. And it will be with Washington Commerce as the state agency and Energy Northwest.
What's the timeline right now for any of this happening?
So these are very long lead time projects. This $25 million that I mentioned was for Energy Northwest to begin due diligence and some environmental review. That is expected to take several years. And on this project itself, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will be, the permitter, obviously, and the lead agents, the lead federal agency. I've heard anywhere between 2030 and 2035 before these were to, start construction. I can't independently verify those dates, but it does generally speaking, like the DOE has kind of been unwrapping this for quite some time. The increased interest and renewed interest in nuclear energy has been coming for the last 20 years, and so there's still some time before construction would begin, but it is something that the tribe is watching incredibly, incredibly closely and really trying to participate and engage in the process in a meaningful way.
Martha, tribal leaders who you speak with, and also just regular tribal citizens, not necessarily leadership positions, but just people who are concerned about that community, what are they telling you? What are their biggest concerns, biggest fears?
So among tribal leadership and tribal members, what we're hearing is that there is just a real concern in regards to the impact of nuclear energy and nuclear waste on first foods and on human health and the viability of the environment. that's really at the heart of this, is that there's some very real concerns, particularly when it comes to radioactive waste and the storage of the waste. There's still not the political will to create a deep geologic repository. What some proponents of nuclear energy really talk about is the fact that the waste may be less than other quote unquote clean energy mechanisms, but it still raises a lot of concern for tribal members. There's also concerns in regards to, the transportation piece. So right now, a lot of the waste is temporarily located on the ceded lands. We know that in this case, temporary in lieu of any other solution, temporary is at this point permanent. So really watching, without getting into the weeds as far as low-level or high-level radioactive waste, generally there's just concern for waste and its impact on first foods and land.
Sure. Martha, do you know of other nuclear power plants that are being proposed elsewhere? And and again, if this isn't a question that you feel qualified to answer, just let me know. But I grew up in the 1970s, early 1980s. I remember movies like The China Syndrome and just, 3 Mile Island, and everybody was just so worried about the risks of nuclear energy. What about now? It's more than 40 years later. Is it safer than it was back in those days?
So, I'll say what I can with the caveat that I am not, I'm an attorney. I'm not a technical expert on nuclear. I've learned an enormous amount recently. I think that there probably have been, from what I know, some move towards making nuclear energy safer. There are other nuclear projects out there, including, for instance, the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project out of Cedros, Texas, which is using X Energy's XE100 technology. And there is kind of this move away from fission and towards fusion, but that seems to be like very, very far off. And so I don't really understand all the technological implications there. What I can say is that, there is this tension between the tools that we have kind of created for ourselves today, including, the technology that we use for restoration projects, and to run, tribal government. Like a lot of the tribal consultation may or may not happen, for instance, online through Zoom calls. And so all of that takes up a lot of energy. And so it's hard to see when there are certain mandated decarbonization goals and the increased need for this energy, like how we're going to get away from needing to explore other options, including perhaps nuclear energy. And so for the Confederated Tribes, what that means is moving forward with creating and adapting the most protective policies possible for tribal membership.
All right. I like how you use that term tension between the different tools, because it really does sound like it all comes down to just balance and understanding that balance and having priorities.
Exactly. That's exactly it, Sean. And, AI, the conversation around AI and data centers is being hooked to nuclear, and they do, in a sense, feed on each other, but they're really on parallel tracks. And this conversation in regards to nuclear has been happening for a little bit longer than some of these more technological innovations. And so it's an interesting conversation to follow for sure.
All right.
And it is about balance.
Sure. We're out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up this conversation, but I would like to thank all of our guests who joined us today: Marissa Naranjo, Dr. Arjun Makajani, Pat Moss, and Martha Eisenson. Join us tomorrow when we will have a discussion about the possible consequences of inflamed discourse on social media. I'm Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling.
My name is Tammy, and I'm a member of the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians. Smoking gave me heart disease. I used to think of cigarette smoking as something that only affected me. Then at just 44 years old, I had to look into my mom's eyes on the way into emergency heart surgery and tell her, Mommy, I promise I won't make you bury me. My tip is, think about the people in your life who love you. They go through the pain too, maybe even more than you do.
The people you love are worth quitting for. You can quit. For free help, call 1-800-QUIT-NOW. A message from the CDC.
Support by AARP. If someone asks you to buy gift cards to pay off debt, it's a scam. Imposters will claim your Social Security number's at risk, or your utility company will stop service due to late payments, or you won the lottery and only need to pay some upfront costs. They'll say the fastest way is to buy gift cards and share the numbers on the back. Anyone who tells you to pay a debt with a gift card is a scammer. More information on gift card scams at aarp.org/giftcards.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.